Right. Welcome everyone to today's session on outsourcing R&D, a new model for growth. So my name is Dina Samra and I am the Director of Partnerships at Newlab. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I couldn't be more excited to MC today's webinar on a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Many of you might be familiar with our work at Newlab, but others may be encountering our work for the first time today. If you learn one thing about Newlab, I hope it's the way we are committed to applying transformative technology to things that matter. Newlab is home to a growing community of entrepreneurs, inventors, and engineers. We support over 150 companies made up of 800 individuals working across tech domains like robotics, material science, connected systems, additive manufacturing, quantum computing, AI, and many more. We also work with government agencies, Fortune 500 companies, and researchers, and we're deeply invested in multidisciplinary collaboration with the importance of bringing an entrepreneurial, civic, and ethical lens to our commitment of advancing technology. Over the past year, Newlab has been working hard to launch several innovation studios alongside corporate partners like Ford, Verizon, and many others. Through this successful model, we've started to see the emerging importance of outsourcing R&D, and in this hour-long conversation, you will hear firsthand from innovation and R&D leaders who will give you a sneak peek into their own efforts of partnering with the external world. A few housekeeping notes before I hand it over to Shaun Stewart, Newlab CEO and moderator for the day. Throughout this hour, we're going to conduct interactive polls, so please keep an eye out for those questions popping up and do weigh in. We'd love to see your perspective reflected in the results. Additionally, our panelists are looking to field questions from the audience. To ask a question, please type it out in the Q&A button and I will help to get those in front of our panelists. Without further ado, I would like our panelists to go around and spend a minute or two introducing themselves and their roles and what R&D means in their world. We will begin with Daniel Chu, who is the External Innovation Director at GSK Consumer Health. Daniel, please go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Dina. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Chu. I'm the External Innovation Director at GlaxoSmithKline Consumer Healthcare. In that particular role, I have the responsibility for search, identifying, and engaging external third parties as part of our efforts to identify innovations and developing new consumer healthcare products.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Next, we have Lamar Specter, who's the Executive Director of Ventures and Alliances for Raytheon Technologies. Lamar, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lamar Specter. I have been involved in R&D in many respects. I got my start in research, doing a PhD in atomic physics. I then spent some time at McKinsey as a management consultant, and I've been with Raytheon Technologies, formerly United Technologies, now for about 4 years, starting in our mergers and acquisitions technology strategy team, and now working with startups leading our new ventures arm in the form of a digital incubator. So very excited to be here.
Great. Thank you, Lamar. And last but certainly not least, we have Christos Stamboulidis, who is the global lead for R&D technology scouting and external collaborations at International Flavors and Fragrances, also known as IFF. Christo, please go ahead.
Thanks, Dina, and thanks to the Newlab team for inviting me to today's talk. My name is Christos Stamboulidis. I'm a chemical engineering by training with a PhD in the field of rheology. After I graduated, I have a little bit of a background in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I worked for a startup and then I started my own business. That was in the past. The last 1.5 years, I've been with IFF and I lead the tech scouting group and external collaborations. And the crux of what I do is I'm looking outside the four walls of IFF to try and find innovative technologies and solutions that can help us move our R&D strategic initiatives faster and better. And thanks again for inviting me.
Awesome. Thank you, Christo. Great. I will pass it over to Shaun, who can kick us off for the day.
Amazing. Well, first and foremost, thank you all for taking the time to be here. I know all three of you have pretty busy day-to-day schedules, and so we appreciate you carving out an hour to discuss this exciting topic. I think we'll jump straight in and maybe start with you, Christo. I think your title obviously includes external collaborations and partnerships, but you must still be tasked with like internal coordination, kind of understanding what internal departments need, internal perspectives on prioritization. How do you manage that balance and field and understand an open dialogue between the internal departments you work with day to day to then leverage kind of and develop external strategies?
Great question. Basically, the way that I approach my role is, I would say, more of with a push-pull strategy. The pull part is that throughout the year, we set the goals with the R&D leaders. We go through the prioritization of all the initiatives. And basically what I do, I have a very close communication with the R&D leaders, but also with the key technical experts within their groups. So basically, I'm aware of their needs, what they need to do today, what is our short, midterm, and long-term strategic goals. And I go outside to find these technologies to bring them in and support the needs. On the other hand, which is the push part, which is, I can say it's a little bit more exciting. I spend a lot of time within the ecosystem, and I meet a lot of innovative, smart people that have great ideas, crazy ideas. And what I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to identify which one of these scientific solutions or technologies can directly help our needs, or in another case, there are some that they can be adjacent to what we do, and that's when I use more of the push strategy, and I try to bring those in and communicate those with the R&D leaders and the R&D teams internally.
Got it. That's really helpful. And so if we continue that kind of push-pull model, Daniel, at GSK, like you obviously have both the health needs of customers out there to consider, but then you also have internal opportunities for innovation and optimization of your processes or how you develop products and a range of other pieces. How do you balance that prioritization? How do you seek out and find the patient's needs versus the internal opportunities for innovation and R&D?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think in some cases, and it's a great question, in some cases, actually, it's both one and the same, right? And so from a GlaxoSmithKline consumer healthcare perspective, and just to kind of set some context, because I think a lot of folks are probably familiar with the pharma business and maybe our vaccines business. But the consumer healthcare business are brands, over-the-counter brands that you're familiar with, like Advil or Sensodyne or Pronamel, brands that you just buy off the shelf in any store. And so very much a consumer-focused, consumer-centric company, but also very much science-led. And so very similar fashion to, as Christo explained, from a push-pull perspective, we work really closely with all of our internal stakeholders, identifying and laying out effectively a strategy in terms of what needs to happen, not only from a product perspective, but also internally relative to specific challenges, as you stated, and that gives us the direction in terms of what I need to be focused on. If I'm looking for specific molecules or digital technology or operational efficiencies that allow us to execute our overall strategic goals, to be honest, they're very much one and the same, and it's all led from this insight that we derive by being very consumer focused. And so early on, as we set strategy at the beginning of every year, we think through all of those elements that consumers are needing, and we identify those gaps, and we set forth as to, from an external innovation standpoint, what we actually want to search. So from our perspective, it's really very much one and the same.
No, it's very helpful. And so, Lamar, I'd love to hear kind of that balance of that push-pull model for you and whether it's similar, but also as we jump into like what you do outside of your organization, you guys have had a pretty unique model in regards to how you interact with startups, a venture customer model at Raytheon. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you tackle that working with external partners, and also how you do so with such sensitive R&D topics and products. You guys obviously are in aerospace through the defense. How do you work with external players on such sensitive topics and materials?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say in terms of the venture customer model, we've tried to be very, very thoughtful in coming up with a way to interact with startups, with accelerators, with venture capitalists, and of course, with our business partners within Raytheon Technologies to try to come up with a way that is win-win for all parties. So the way we do that is essentially aligning incentives. We go to the businesses, we ask them for a particular business need use case, and then we'll do a startup search to try to find startups that match up with that use case. that allows our startups to come in right out of the gate, having someone within the company that is very much pulling for them and gunning for them and willing to fund them should the product development go well. And it also allows us to be able to fulfill these pressing business needs with startups that may have technology or talent in topics that we don't have internally. And you're absolutely right. Within commercial aerospace, and even more so within the defense space, there are some very sensitive topics. And so sometimes that means that we do have to work with startups that have particular characteristics. They might need to have U.S. persons within them in certain cases, or potentially governments from abroad, depending on who our customer is. And we do ask that our startups be very protective of our data. So we have these very specific data processes in place that allow us to get the startups what they need in order to get their job done, but at the same time, protect our IP, protect our data, and protect that of our customers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so as you start to find these external bodies, obviously, like in our innovation studios, part of the challenge is translating, like an academic institution versus a startup versus a large corporation, a government body. They all have their own approaches, their own systems. You can categorize that as maybe just language that you need to translate between. Christo, I'd love to hear, kind of in the IFF world, like what have you found works to bring these external partners into the ecosystem to allow them to be as effective as possible once they're collaborating with you? What have been the successes and maybe even the failures that you could share in regards to how to bring external insights into an organization?
Sure. Well, some of the failures or some of the challenges, I wouldn't call them failures. Some of the challenges I think comes with if you look at it more on the specificities with quality or regulatory, sometimes we as a multinational global company, we have some specific standards. Sometimes working with startups, the standards might be a little bit different. It's not as such as one is wrong and one is right, but it's to put it very simply is that somebody can sell a product, whereas we cannot sell it as is. It needs to go through a quality and regulatory roadmap. Then some other challenges that we may have are internally with pushback. There may be instances that we already working with some of these technologies. IP is obviously very huge for us. We need to be very creative with our legal teams about how we can work and how we can collaborate with the startups to make sure that we protect ourselves and we make sure that we protect them. And then obviously, I think that one of the biggest challenges that I have seen personally is with the collaboration model and how to structure that. And I'm saying this in a very good way. I found that a lot of startups, they're using the CRO model. That is a model that has been used traditionally for many years, I would say, in the pharma business. And as you know, obviously, with your experience and everybody's experience here, that not one model fits everything, right? To me, that has been the most challenging part. And a lot of times I think that, we are in the B2B world. We create, develop ingredients, and these ingredients need to go to other companies that are going to make products for the consumers. I think that sometimes startups may not really understand, what does that mean. Many or most think D2C, B2C. I want to make this product. I want to reach 1 billion customers. I want to sell, $10 per product to the customers. That's it. So market size, $10 billion. Or in the B2B, it's a little bit different, right? I might be looking for a unique ingredient that needs to go in a larger set of compounds to create a solution for my customers, and the numbers might not be the way they think about it. So I think that is where there might be a misunderstanding or miscommunication. But what I think works, if I can choose my my top three learnings, first and foremost is trust. I cannot stress this more. We want to work with startups. I want to work with you so we can both be very successful. I want to help you, you help me, and I think once that trust is being built, I've found that the partnership has been very successful. And after that, when you have trust, I think you have patience from both sides, right? We want the improved technology. They want quick response. I think that's like it can be colliding sometimes, but I think once you have trust and you have that patience, that leads to success. And the third part, which is obviously going into more the technical aspect, is to work with the startups and work with our internal R&D experts to make sure that the roadmap, the R&D milestones, the technical milestones are A, clear, and B, realistic. I think once that is said and when that happens, I think everybody's on the same page, and there are no surprises, and the communication becomes much more crisp.
Yeah, and you mentioned IP, which is obviously a pretty thorny challenge for everyone as we look at external technologies and research that's already in flight before we contact them. Can you talk a little bit about how you structured IP arrangements obviously in a nutshell? I know it's a complex topic, but what is the right approach to arrangements that protect both parties' interests that you would recommend?
Great question. I don't think there is a right answer. I think, and also I joined IFF, which is, we are in B2B. Before IFF, I was with a CPG, so we're making products directly that go to consumers. At that time, I was interacting with suppliers like we are. So I've seen a little bit of both worlds. I think in the B2B world, and obviously I don't want to be generalizing, but the IP protection of the technology is very important. I would say it's more important than some of the CPGs. I think for a lot of the CPGs, sometimes they just want that winning compound or that winning ingredient that they can just put it in their formulas and make a product that goes to the consumers. They don't care about anything. Hey, I'm going to pay for this. Just give it to me. For us, it is very important. Obviously, we are very protective with everything that we develop. But I think the fine balance is when we work with other companies is what we bring as our background IP and how that background IP is leading or guiding the discovery of more intellectual property. And as you probably know, then it becomes a little bit of a long discussion with the legal teams. But I think overall, what it makes sense is to find something that is, to be logical about it and what is fair for both sides.
Totally. And Daniel, if we continue with that, so we're obviously going through the process, you're finding external talent, and Christo talked about some of the systems and processes to ensure that language translation occurs well. Then you go through piloting some of this technology that's developed. We see similar piloting in our innovation studios. And then one of the key challenges, though, is how you take a pilot into an expanded commercial arrangement that actually is successful, that you don't see organ rejection as you start to bring this into the organization full time. Absolutely. What have you learned about making that transition successful?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Christo really laid the groundwork for a lot of that, right? Ultimately, it's as Christo mentioned, all about trust and transparency, and really what is that roadmap ultimately? For us, you can often get stuck in the pilot or POC stage and iterate over and over again, but without a clear roadmap and clear communication between not only us as a corporate, but also with the third party, you don't have the necessary objectives, milestones, or what you want to learn at each stage to be able to achieve to that next step, right? So you can get stuck in a POC stage because that level of clarity hasn't been established with your counterparty. And therefore, you know, when it comes to discussions, you start circling around the topic over and over again. So from our perspective at GSK, we very much lay out a clear roadmap of where we are today, where we want to reach in the future, and the various steps that we need to achieve. And it may be, we've actually taken a step of creating a lot of smaller POCs. We used to do a massive big POC at the beginning, where there were just too many objectives, too many milestones that we wanted to achieve, and we couldn't pass that step. And so we've now broken it down very much in a funnel-like process, achieving very small incremental pieces, identifying that objectives 1, 2, and 3 have been achieved. All right, let's move on to the next phase. And we have that clear roadmap. And so for us, it's really a matter of, you know, almost laying out the breadcrumbs of what we want to accomplish at each stage, being very clear on it. And not only from a GSK perspective, but also what is the third party looking to achieve at each stage? Because ultimately for them to advance not only their main focus, they need to also be very clear to us what they want to achieve so that we can help them achieve that as well. Because if GSK is accomplishing its milestones and objectives, but the third party isn't, well, that's not a successful partnership or collaboration. So from that perspective, we've gone into this mode of small test and learn, a very agile process. All right, here are the 2 or 3 objectives that we want to achieve in this particular small POC. Let's achieve them and then move on to the next one. But we have very clear roadmap, or a very clear roadmap as to how to advance it to a commercial level. And so that has actually allowed us to be more successful in our collaborations and partnerships and discussions with third parties.
Got it. And across all 3 of you, anyone could chime in. Like, do you have examples of startup pilots that you've launched that have actually successfully folded in permanently into the operations? And anything you can share about what made those examples successful versus others? I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but if you have any, chime in.
Well, I can, I can share everything that I can share. I think it started a collaboration before I joined the company, but I think it's one of our good examples. I think it started initially as a joint development. We were very interested in the startup's technology. We went through a successful proof of concept. And I think here, and I just want to put a parenthesis, and I just wanted to add something to what Daniel was saying. A key success criterion for me also is to truly have a dedicated R&D team that is supporting that roadmap. I think, you know, if they're truly dedicated and they have time allocated to do this, that is a recipe for success, because other times I feel that a lot of our R&D folks are super busy with their day-to-day, so then they cannot really do the deep dive that they need to do. So if I go back to my example, in this case, we really worked with them, and the proof of concept was successful. I think after that, we moved into more of an investment or minority stake, and then I think we fully acquired them. So now they are an extension, or they're part of our R&D platform, and fully working, obviously, with our IFF internal R&D team to fully commercialize this technology.
Amazing. That's a great example. And so Lamar, obviously, Christo talking about in-house R&D teams, you're starting to get into culture and managing your own workforce versus just like an external source of innovation. UTC and Raytheon obviously just went through a pretty interesting merger this year. And I'd love to hear about the different cultures you see between organizations and innovation, how you create safe failure spaces where people know they can try new things, even if they don't always work, how you source new innovation concepts. Like, what have you seen as you've brought together 2 different cultures in regards to building the right innovative R&D culture?
Yeah, it's actually been very exciting. So we are just past our first 100 days of the merger. So we're actually very, very newly into this. And so I am absolutely in the process of learning, since I come from the heritage UTC side, all about the legacy Raytheon technologies and capabilities, and also their engagement with the startup community. And so we're definitely in the thick of things right now, having a lot of conversations and just getting to know what is out there and what the business needs are. I've been very excited to find out that, obviously on the commercial aerospace side, we've been doing a lot of engagement with the startup community, but I've been thrilled to hear how much our intelligence and space business has been engaging with startups, how excited they are to really leverage those relationships and get kind of more out of them. So I would say, ask me that question in a year. We'll see how things actually integrate. At the moment, it's been absolutely exciting. And kind of to the conversation earlier, I do want to echo what Daniel was saying in terms of it is critical to break up the engagement into chunks. We found that as well. We also have a pipeline because it's interesting when you're working with a startup. It's not like working with an external company. It's not like you can tell them, here's my requirements, please deliver me with a service. They're, of course, building their entire business around it, their entire core IP, and you have to be respectful of that. And you also have to provide an enormous level of kind of engagement with them in order to be able to build that up. So completely agree. You have to set up a proof of concept, a prototype, potentially a pilot before you get into actual development with goals, with milestones. And we found that to be very helpful in avoiding the double downfalls of data and IP that can plague lots of folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we're talking about that culture side of things, like all three of you come from organizations that have significant in-house talent. You obviously have your own resources that are innovative and have capabilities around R&D and engineering. How do you get them comfortable with the fact that you're looking at external resources? How do you avoid that organ rejection where people don't want to consider everything that's outside and consider the internal to be priority? And that's open to anyone, like just strategies for getting internal teams comfortable that external help is not a bad thing. It's not a sign of weakness to be looking for insights outside of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take part of that question. So, within GSK, at least let's say from a digital perspective. So GSK being more a traditional consumer healthcare company, we have great scientists, great innovators focused on identifying the next great product, advancing the science around products that we have in pain relief, headache, oral care, respiratory care, etc. But when it came to digital, everyone was very excited because digital was, at least for us, a new space within GSK. And each of our product categories thought about different digital opportunities relative to their particular space. So let's say our pain relief teams, whether it's brands like Excedrin or Panadol or Advil, they're all very familiar with the science and say the molecular side of that business. But when it comes to the digital side, that's all very much new, and they're actually very excited to see what's happening externally. And so for me, being focused really on digital opportunities in consumer healthcare, it's all about taking them along for the ride in terms of identifying new opportunities, getting them involved. And for them, it's a big learning process. And so for me, it was a means by which I was creating a new environment, a new learning environment for them to be able to see the direction of this new space in digital consumer healthcare. And so that worked really well. It's a space that, yes, they are very much internally allocated resources focused on developing new products, but they also want to see what's the next generation, and a lot of that is coming from external companies. So I really focused on being a bridge for our internal resources to be able to have that experience and to get that education.
Right, and all three of you, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lamar.
I was going to say, I completely agree. I have also worked with our folks within our research center and our engineering teams to look at companies. And one of the pieces that has been most critical for me is really leveraging them as technical experts. They are, of course, beacons in their fields. And there's no reason for us not to be able to use that to help us understand whether the startups are meeting our needs or whether we need to go a different direction. So we've found them to be tremendous partners.
Hmm.
And if I can add to, completely agree with Lamar and Daniel. At IFF, we develop products and solutions to make products for the consumers taste and smell better. I can say that I've met amazing chemists. I've been with the company for 30, 40 years with I don't know how many patents. You would think that they would have been very old school, but they're very creative and very open to new ideas, very transparent. And I can say that within the last strongly five, but also the last 5-10 years, that a lot of changes the way consumers want their products, from either transparency into technology and the R&D to be green, naturals, vegan, sustainable. And obviously, there is a realization that no company has all the in-house expertise to do everything, right? And as long as people are open and I have created my own internal network with my champions internally from the R&D side, and I think that is a good way to make sure that we have. We spend a good amount of time with passion to look about the external the opportunities that come from external companies.
Yeah, and if you keep going with that, Christo, like you obviously don't wake up every morning with an inbox full of the exact startups you're looking for. People don't know what you're out there searching for. And in our studios, a lot of the time, adjacent technology is actually the most interesting and relevant and impactful. We have a studio in mining. The companies and technology we're piloting there weren't focused on mining. They didn't even know that industry had an opportunity for them, and bringing them together is key. What have you learned are the right tactics that people should consider to find these startups? If there are partnerships that you've developed with VCs or universities? And I'd love to hear from all of you about like the right ways to find the technology that's going to have an impact.
Well, I don't. I think that somebody in a role that we are, the three of us, looking for external collaborations. I think if you ask 10 people from 10 different companies about what does technology scouting mean, it can mean 10 different things, but I think in the essence, everybody is trying to do the same thing. It all depends on the size and the people and the models and the softwares and the capabilities. But what I think is the most important thing is to truly understand what is out there. For our side, there are a lot of technologies that are adjacent to what we do. And I say this many times when I talk to people. Me being an entrepreneur in the past, I don't think that I had an idea of, I'm going to make this amazing B2B ingredient or B2B molecule, right? You think about what the consumers want. But talking to people, getting to know and understand the technology, sometimes you realize what is that they can pivot. I can show them the B2B world, right? And I can show them an opportunity for perhaps an easier path to development, but also an easier path for them to start generating revenues. So that is one thing. And on the other hand, we have tried to build formal and informal relationships with VCs, with angels, incubators, accelerators, venture studios like Newlab, university, technology offices. And I think that everybody can help somebody. And that's where I've seen the most power is that, as I have, I would say, friends in Newlab and other places that can say, hey, Christo, we came across this startup and I think what they do might be useful for you. We don't want to invest in them right now, or the technology doesn't work for us. And whether that's, people from other companies that are not competing companies with us, obviously, but from that ecosystem, and vice versa. I have a lot of startups that they come to me and after one or two discussions, I realize that, you know what, great idea, but come back to us after 10 years, or we're not interested right now, but I can pick up the phone and say, hey, Shaun, they're looking for someone to help them either invest money in them, and I might vet it and think that the technology is good, but at the same time, maybe they're looking for an ecosystem like a venture studio, so they can find other people and build their company with better foundation. So to me, that has worked very well in the last 1.5 years, and I strongly recommend to people to network and build these strong relationships.
Yeah. And Lamar, for the aerospace field, like obviously these are pretty capital intensive areas. Is it harder to find startups? Is there anything unique you have to do in that field regarding the topics and focus areas of Raytheon compared to what Daniel or Christo might do to find these startups?
I would agree with Christo that the ecosystem really is critical. And of course, there's no one right way to find a startup, right? We found that online tools are really helpful. Industry partners are critical. We hold competitions sometimes. I once found a startup from a candidate suggestion in the hiring process, because I always ask candidates to come in with startup suggestions for us. But for me, really what is critical is in the model that we've created, aligning incentives, because we don't just simply give startups funding and say, okay, we've given you some money like a typical venture capital fund would, go on and do your thing. What our carrot really is Raytheon Technologies, we're a Fortune 50 company. We can give you a piece of work at the end of the day if our joint product development is sufficiently successful. And so that's essentially what we're always gearing towards. And that means that we're not competing with venture capital firms or with industry accelerators or with others, and that helps us get recommendations coming our way a little bit easier. It also allows for the startups to want to work with us a little bit more, I've found, and that helps a lot. I don't think we necessarily really think about having a startup as the be all end all for one of our customers, a Boeing or an Airbus. We're not trying to have one startup create an airplane. So our asks are a little bit smaller, and so from that respect, they can really solve kind of specific problems for us.
Hmm. And with your field, and I'd love, Daniel, your comment here too, is
Sure.
Obviously deploying a pilot in aerospace, Lamar, is got a significant timeline. Like, how do you plan out, and is there a typical timeline of we should be able to source an idea, pilot an idea, and move towards actually scaling it or concluding whether it's relevant in a year, in a quarter, or is every case unique and people should just expect that they develop timelines once the situation becomes more clear?
It really does depend on the use case itself and what we're trying to create. That said, we try not to make each phase longer than a few months. 3 to 6 months is probably typical for a given phase, because we do want to set these goals and milestones both for the startup and for ourselves to be able to evaluate and say, have we been hitting our targets? Are we progressing towards the ultimate product that we want to create? Do we want to take this in a different direction? And is this partnership working for both sides? Because as we progress through that process, we also have legal agreements that get kind of more and more complex as our products get more and more well-defined and our working relationship becomes closer. So that's something that we want to continually keep in mind.
Yeah, and our studios go through from research and discovery to pilot deployment, usually in a 12-month cycle. Daniel, is that the same for the health industry and the type of products and concepts you're working on, or is it a much longer timeline?
It very much varies. And actually, I'm kind of blending a bit of the question that you asked both Christo and Lamar. So in terms of like, when we think about, for us, we look for opportunities in third parties and startups in a multi-channel approach, right? So as Christo was talking about, it's very much developing a network, ensuring that people out who are effectively sort of your ambassadors are, understand what you're looking for. But, I could be talking to the accelerator incubator community, could be talking to the VC community, could be talking to external scouts, but there isn't one key way to be able to do external innovation. It's really all a matter of time frame. So kind of getting back to the last question you asked me is, what am I looking for? If I'm looking for something that's really near term, that we want to be able to commercialize, we're looking for a very mature company. And therefore, we're probably not talking to, VCs or accelerators. We're probably going directly to a scout. Whereas if we're looking at a longer term opportunity that we want to commercialize in 3, 4, or 5 years, then we could perhaps look at earlier stage companies. But then to your point with Lamar, in terms of also, it's about risk management, right? For us, the earlier the stage of the company, the higher level of risk. And so being very much a science-led company where we have clinical trials, we need clinical evidence to be able to make a claim against our products or for our products. And so that time horizon of having that clinical evidence can be very long. And so the more mature company that you speak with that has that clinical evidence, they've lowered the risk, they've increased their value, and they've also shortened the time frame by which we can engage them. But if we're working with a startup where very high risk, just inherent with the company, or the nature of that type of company, less clinical evidence, maybe less clinical data, and consequently perhaps lower value. But if we have the time horizon to be able to help them develop that clinical evidence, develop the pathway to reaching commercial viability, then we're happy to engage depending on our strategic outcome. So it very much depends on our objective of what we want to be able to bring to market, when, the level of maturity of the company that we need to be able to engage to accomplish that, and the risk reward nature of that type of engagement. So I think within our space, in as much as we'd love to be able to work with third parties and startups that have the clinical evidence, that have all of their data on hand and have already been approved by, let's say, the FDA, that's really tough for a lot of startups to be able to achieve, because as you can probably, no doubt realize, clinical studies are not cheap. And so they do need help, they do need assistance, and this is a space in which a company like GSK and as well as others can help and assist.
Yeah, and so with that amount of unpredictability, and you start to get into the cost of trials and things like that, I guess a two-part question. One would certainly be, how do you enter a year with a budget or a forecast? How do you predict what you're going to need to spend over a 12-month period on R&D with so many unknowns? Some of our pilots can take 20 days, some of them end up taking a full year, but we usually find that out once you're digging into the technology and starting to proof out the concept. And then I guess the second part of that, does that mean this is a big company game? Like, if you're a 200-person organization, is the concept of external innovation and R&D ridiculous and you should focus on your small kind of term objectives? Or is this something that every company should consider as part of their strategy?
I really like the second question. I think that everybody should be looking externally. There is an understanding with, if you look back 20 years, a lot of companies had a lot of cash and they were spending it. And I think there is this belief that a lot of the big companies have a lot of money to spend all the time, which is not true. I think if there is understanding from both sides, I think that small companies also can work with other companies and find creative ways to work together. I'm a true believer of a shared risk and shared reward model. Particularly if you are the entrepreneur and you truly believe in your technology and you're very passionate about it, I think it's fair that everybody puts the same skin in the game. Whether you're a 10 people company, 200 people company, 5,000, 50,000, I think there are opportunities out there to creatively build strong collaborations with external partners. As long as people can get out of the mindset of this is not just a simple transaction, and as Lamar mentioned earlier, they just don't go and give checks to startups and then they go their way and then we sit back and wait. I think there are a lot of creative ways that we can work with them to make sure that you can have like an effective collaboration.
Got it. Lamar, I'd love to hear your perspective there on kind of the budgeting approach, specifically some of the things you might kind of tackle could have significant cost to them.
Yeah, and Christo, I would go even one step further from what you said, is how vehemently I agree with you, is to say that we can't afford anymore to look only internally, because there is so much talent and technology in the startup world that it would be doing our own companies a disservice to look only at our own navels and what we can do. It's just a way to expand our reach. In terms of Shaun, what you're asking, I'm actually going through the budgeting process right now for 2021. It's really a matter of thinking through, how many proof of concepts we think we will do, how many pilots, how many prototypes, etc. And then kind of adding up those numbers, and that gives us a rough budget. You do have to be a little bit flexible when time comes around and look at opportunities as they come up, because I come from the mergers and acquisitions world. It's another world where you can't necessarily know ahead of time what's going to be a game changer for your company, because you don't know what's going to be out there. And to some extent, startups are very similar in that respect. You have to be open to the opportunities, but we do need to budget, and so we try to take the estimate as best we can.
Got it. And across all three of you, I'd be curious, like you mentioned M&A, Lamar, like a startup often is thinking the path here is acquisition. That's the outcome they're looking for. Often maybe there's just investment or procurement or other options out there. Is that the right focus of bringing the company in-house eventually when it's proved out, or is it more important to keep them independent? Like, what should these founders know as they start to participate in these type of opportunities?
My perspective would be, let's keep an open mind as a company. Founders, sometimes you're right, sometimes they are very gung-ho on being acquired, but also very often they're gung-ho on remaining independent and gaining you as one of their key first customers. And I think you have to be willing to do that as well. I don't think there is one right answer. It'll depend on your use case, but more importantly, at least for us, it depends on what the startup is interested in.
Yeah. Daniel, any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there is no one right answer. I think it's a matter of where you fit within the value chain and the ecosystem, right? If you are a startup that is providing very much a unique capability or a unique offering that many can use, then why would you want to necessarily be acquired? But let's say from a GSK perspective, we may look at you as saying, okay, you provide a unique offering and capability, and therefore we would want to be able to acquire that capability or offering and effectively making an exclusive relationship, right? So it's a matter of just thinking of positionally, where do you fit? If you're a startup founder, where do you fit within the ecosystem, and what value you bring to your audience, to your customers? If you are potentially one of many, then it's perhaps a more challenging discussion. But if you have a good understanding of where you fit and therefore the value that you bring to a customer or to a potential acquirer, then you have a better sense as to how you want to navigate that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it obviously wouldn't be a webinar in 2020 without a COVID-19 question. And so I think the two pieces I'd throw out there as questions for all three of you, and we'll start with you, Christo, is in times like this, there's companies obviously looking at budgets with greater scrutiny. They're seeing financial challenges maybe in one area or another. does that mean innovation is even more important, and this kind of effort of looking at R&D is crucial to continue to build new business lines, finding new sources of revenue or optimization? Or is it batten down the hatches and try to just keep the business safe and restrict that type of spending behavior? And then I was just curious, during the last quarter or so of COVID-19, have you seen changes in how companies are approaching collaborative R&D innovation? Is there anything people should know is the most recent development over the last 90, 120 days?
Well, I think a good balance with everything is very important, and obviously I can speak for our industry. I know that there's some other industries that they have been hit harder than our industry. We are supplying ingredients for basic needs, whether that is personal care, home care, and food. And those are industries that are still going well, but there are other industries that, as you can understand, that there are a lot of challenges and issues. Obviously, you know, it's not a secret that everyone's budgets are being chopped off, and it makes sense. But we haven't stopped our discussions, our ongoing activities with the ecosystem. I can say that sometimes I feel I'm busier now, because I think the universities and the startups, they might have more time in their hands because they have not been in the lab. So for them, it's more like, let's talk, and let's have these discussions, which is good. And then with the whole COVID, obviously, it's not a secret that everybody is working in a different way that they were working before. I could say for the three of us, I would say, without knowing exactly day-to-day activities for Daniel and more, that a lot of your work before probably could have happened from home or actually from anywhere. So, you know, connecting with the external people and the internal people hasn't stopped us. So I think we haven't really, and it, you know, I know it's a long path to answering your question. We haven't really stopped the way that we have seen we approach innovation and the R&D partnerships, and hopefully things are going to get better, and we can keep on, we can continue working with the external people that we are right now.
No, that's really helpful. And Lamar, I was curious, one of the things we found in our studios, our Verizon 5G studio is an example where a lot of the interesting collaborations have been not large corporation Verizon with startups. There's been a lot of interesting outcomes and pilots there, but also large corporations piloting with large corporations, people wanting to test their applications on a 5G network. We've talked a lot about accessing startups for innovation and research. Have you found interesting models or approaches to actually teaming up with other corporations in adjacent industries to tackle R&D or innovation opportunities?
We do a lot of that kind of as an overall business, especially within our defense space. It's very common for large corporations to go after, you know, a source of government funding together and apply for that together. Oftentimes that also includes a startup in the mix as well. So we do see that within the incubator. That isn't our specific focus, so we haven't delved into it. But Raytheon Technologies as a whole definitely does a lot of collaborations with large companies.
Got it. And I think we've got a few more minutes, and then Dina, certainly if there's any key questions on the Q&A. But I was curious also about embedding teams. Like, do all three of your organizations actually bring these startups and they live within your organization? Are they becoming part of the culture? Are they sitting with your team on a daily basis? Or is that independence actually pretty crucial and you should keep them at an arm's length? And Daniel, we can start with you, but obviously all three of you feel free to chime in.
Right. So we haven't embedded any startups within our GSK offices. It's actually not something that we've actually thought about or considered. Perhaps more so, I think, just due to the way our offices are configured. And so maybe more of a real estate thing that we hadn't thought about it. But it might be something that we should consider, I think, going forward. Although it's obviously in today's, you know, COVID-19 environment, perhaps it may be a little bit more challenging, that What we are seeing actually are using new platforms in which we are engaging each other on a much more intimate manner. So for instance, in addition to Slack, in addition to Teams, we've been using different tools and platforms where we can collaborate much more closely. And so to maybe some degree, it's achieving, I think, that embeddedness, not in a physical sense, but in a virtual sense. But as Krista was saying, COVID-19 is having us think through new ways of collaborating with external third parties. And unfortunately, although we can't necessarily do, let's say, on-site due diligence, we're trying to find different ways to be able to accomplish, that same objective.
Yeah, Krista, Lamar, your thoughts there? Anything different there on embedding and bringing teams into the culture of the org?
Yeah, it's something that we actually thought about a lot. We have a beautiful space in Brooklyn right on the water. And we initially, when we were starting out the effort, thought that that would be a great place for startups to come in, have some free office space as part of what we could offer them. But what we found was that it was actually rather limiting. We wanted to make sure to be able to expand our reach globally. We work with startups really across the world, and requiring a startup to commute from Europe, from Asia to Brooklyn just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It adds an extra cost. They were thinking about hiring extra people just to sit in our office, and it was just not a desirable outcome. So while that remains an option post-COVID, once we all return to the offices, I don't think it's one that we'll be pursuing very, very strongly.
Amazing. Christo, last chance. You can get the last word in if you want. We've got a couple of minutes left.
I think we also thought about it, building the space. I've done some research. I've met with a lot of incubators, and I've seen some of the details and the logistics behind it. I think it only makes sense if you have truly a dedicated space, which requires time, resources. If it's something that it's going to be more of like a shared services model, I think that can be competing with internal activities, and that can be very challenging. So we were thinking about it, but I think I don't say we're not going to do it. It's paused. Obviously, 2020, forget about it. It's not going to happen. We're more on the virtual type of support, and with some of the startups that we have the existing partnerships. We have instances that they visit our labs for a week or two to just run some pilots and do some experiments if needed.
Amazing. Well, we're right on a minute left. Dina, any remaining pieces to tackle, or should we thank our amazing participants for their time today?
Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you all so much for spending the last hour with us, and thank you to our guests and everyone that attended. Please be on the lookout for a post-event follow-up from Newlab, where we'll include a recorded video of today's events, plus any handouts and a survey that would help us with all future programming. And if you're interested in joining Newlab, the two main ways you can get involved are through our studio programs, whether you're a corporation or a civic leader looking to launch a new innovation studio, or if you're an entrepreneur interested in becoming a Newlab member. We accept membership applications on a rolling basis. So please just head to newlab.com to find out more about our program. And thank you all again for joining us today. Have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.